Welcome to Moving Through Midlife. I am your host, Courtney, a personal trainer and movement specialist who wants to help you move through midlife with more grace. Each week, we will discuss ways we can show up better for ourselves and our children without the burnout. We will focus on overall health through habit stacking to help increase energy, provide movement snacks to help you move more throughout the day while also moving your body more, and learn from professionals on moving through midlife with ease so that you can feel confident with aging gracefully. Grab your earbuds and join me on a leisurely walk while we discuss moving through midlife. Today, I had the pleasure of speaking with Anna. She is a plant-based registered dietitian with a master's degree in public health nutrition. She's also the founder of PlantNourished, podcast host, and an award-winning published recipe creator. Through private coaching and online courses, she helps busy people with health challenges move easily to plant-based eating for optimal health. Anna empowers them with key skills, practical strategies, and tasty, nourishing plant-based recipes so they can enjoy a health-transforming, vibrant life without long hours in the kitchen. Today, I am excited to be able to share our conversation. If you are looking to live a more plant-forward life or happen to be a plant-based eater, I think you will really enjoy this conversation. Hi, Anna. How are you?
Doing great. Thank you, Courtney.
I am excited to speak with you today because you discuss plant-based eating. And I love plant-based eating. I think it is imperative for us to get more fruits and vegetables into our diet. But I also understand that people can get confused by that statement, plant-based eating. So can you tell me what exactly is plant-based eating?
Absolutely, I would love to. I agree. There are many of these terms out there, plant-based, vegan, whole food plant-based, pescatarian, that I think, and many of them are often used interchangeably by the media or by celebrities, or you come across it in newspapers or in books. So I think it can often be confusing, especially for someone who's new to plant-based eating or who's not familiar with the plant-based world. So I think just on a very basic level, think of plant-based eating as a way of eating that is plant-centered versus meat-centered. So you're really putting plants and plant-based foods as the stars of the plate rather than meats and other animal-based products. And I like to think of the term plant-based as more of an umbrella term, meaning it's a big term under which there are many different kinds of more specialized plant-based diets, like a vegan diet, which excludes all animal products and animal byproducts. You could have a vegetarian diet, which can include eggs and or dairy. You could have a whole food plant-based diet, which is really focused on those minimally processed or unprocessed whole plant-based foods, like the fruits, vegetables, whole grains, beans, nuts, legumes, and seeds. And my focus is on this whole food plant-based diet because studies are showing that a high fiber, whole food plant-based diet really gives you the most health benefits, both in preventing future chronic diseases and also improving your current condition if you have health conditions like high cholesterol or diabetes or high blood pressure, things like that. Now, I just want to make clear, since we're talking about plant-based diets and these terms, that even though there is the term diet in there, it's really not a fad diet, but it's more of a lifestyle choice. So we're looking at this as a long-term kind of a change in your lifestyle. And plant-based eating is not an all or nothing approach. Many people think of plant-based diets as a one, like all or nothing approach, meaning you can either only be on a plant-based diet or you can't be. But I don't agree with that. I think it's more of a spectrum meaning that you could be maybe start on the left side, someone who's eating more than 50% of their plate as more plant-based foods and making them the stars of the plate, to someone who's maybe a vegetarian who's including some eggs and or dairy products in their meals, to someone who's vegan, who's maybe excluding all these animal-based products and byproducts, but maybe is eating quite a bit of processed, commercial, ultra-processed vegan products, to someone who's eating a whole food plant-based diet. So really focusing on those minimally processed or unprocessed whole plant-based foods. So I think anyone could start with at any point on this spectrum. But the goal is to move gradually more and more towards the most healthful form of a plant-based diet, which is that whole food plant-based diet on those whole natural plant-based foods.
Why did you get into more of a plant-based diet, and what is your history with nutrition? What got you started into nutrition yourself?
Yes, I think my story of how I got into nutrition is rather unusual because I fell into nutrition quite unexpectedly. It was my first year in college. At the time, I started out my freshman year double majoring in art and geography. But that summer, I happened to take an introduction to nutrition course as a elective, a college elective, because I thought it would fulfill quite a few of the requirements I had at the time. But of course, when I took that course, I just felt my eyes were open to the world of nutrition, and I saw just how fascinating and useful and practical the world of nutrition was, not just to myself and my own health, but to those around me. So that's when I started to look more into a nutrition degree and started taking those prerequisites, biology and chemistry. And I eventually switched my majors over to nutrition. So that's kind of how I became a dietitian. Initially, though, I wasn't focused on plant-based diets. But gradually over time, as health problems started kind of mounting in my extended family, so my mother-in-law, she has diabetes and she battled lymphoma with 8 rounds of chemotherapy. And my father-in-law, he had prostate cancer and later had thyroid cancer. And my own father, he has high blood pressure. He had emergency stent placed for heart problems, and he has, eye problems, age-related macular degeneration. Plus, I've obviously have an aunt who had lung cancer and battled that for 3 years before she passed on. So, given all these different things happening around me, I naturally got concerned, and I wanted to look for a way that will optimize not only my health, but that of my family and prevent future chronic diseases. So that's when I started looking more into plant-based diets and plant-based eating. And the more I researched and looked into it, the more I was really amazed to see the myriad of health benefits that high fiber whole food plant-based diet can bring. Benefits such as lowering cholesterol, reducing your weights, improving your blood sugars, lowering blood pressure, and even preventing reversing heart disease. That's why our family decided to then transition to a plant-based diet. But I want to say, even though I was a dietitian, I still found that first year of transition really a steep learning curve because I had to find my way around the plant-based world, um, try and learn how to prep and cook with each new whole food plant-based ingredient, and try out multiple recipes to find ones that were really healthy, were really tasty, and my family enjoyed, and that were actually easy to make. And there's actually not too many out there. You have to sift through quite a bit of all the recipes that are on the internet. And all doing all this while I was working and taking care of the home and young children. But I think it was through that experience and the years that followed that I actually discovered my love of recipe creation, learned and developed many time and energy saving plant-based kitchen prep and cooking hacks, working with whole plant-based foods, as well as created many easy yet tasty and simple to make whole food plant-based recipes, and created my Plant Nourished Transition Success Method, which I use now to help my clients and students in my course move easily to a plant-powered lifestyle, and away from a meat-heavy diet to a more plant-powered one. So overall, I think I appreciated the experience that I had because that really helped me kind of bring me to where I am today. And I think with that's given me a passion now to help others, especially those who are busy with health challenges, be able to transform their health through the power of plant-based foods. And I really have this mission to help keep families together for as long as possible by having better health and helping them live life to the fullest.
Do you eat meat or any sources of protein other than the vegetables and beans
Yes,
and things like that? Are you eating protein yourself, or are you more vegan vegetarian?
I would say I am definitely more focused on the whole food plant-based diet. So I would probably say it's about probably 98% or so. The other 2% is maybe more some vegan commercial products, occasionally. Or, occasionally when you're outside or at a like, sometimes accidental ingestion, like at a potluck or something, someone has something that you thought was vegan dish and it turned out maybe had a little bit eggs or something inside that. So, and I would say my family is probably about 95% or so at the moment.
So how do you feel about like the big push on paleo and keto and things like that?
Well, I think that there's definitely, I can understand this push about a high protein, low carb, maybe high fat kind of diet approach. And one of the biggest pushes for it is because it does produce quite a rapid weight loss. And I've talked to clients and those in my community who've tried a keto diet, and that's what they've said. They've experienced there is that rapid weight loss. But the question is that rapid weight loss really fat loss? Because that's what most of us are concerned about if we're trying to lose weight, right? We don't want to lose the muscle, we don't want to lose the other parts, but we really want to lose the fat. And to that, the research seems to show when they compare head to head that really in that first few weeks when you're losing so much weight, you're actually losing more of the water weight, right? Your glycogen's breaking down, other things breaking down. So and actually you're losing muscle as well. When they compare and analyze actually what's being lost in the weight compared to like the plant-based diet, when they actually compare what's being lost. And it turns out the plant-based diet is actually losing more fat loss, the fat mass versus the muscle and other issues. Plus, I'm concerned more with if you think about short term, you're losing weight, if that's your goal, okay. But if you're long term, there's a couple of things. I've had someone in my community mentioned that she's felt really dizzy with all that rapid weight loss, right? There's symptoms that you may experience. And then later on, when you long term wise, if you're adding in these or eating constantly these high animal-based protein foods, which are often packaged or coupled with fat, saturated fat, cholesterol, and other things, you are actually raising your risk of more chronic health problems and chronic diseases like heart issues, heart diseases, and heart attacks, and even can impact diabetes. And possibly cancers down the road. So the question is, what is the most healthful kind of diet that will help you not only lose weight in the right way, actually lose the fat mass, but also promote your chances of longevity of reducing your risk of chronic diseases. And from the research that I've done looking into diets, I still think a plant-based diet, especially if it focuses on whole, natural plant-based foods, is the one that will actually be able to help you reach both these goals, short term and long term.
This gets very difficult for me because this is such a, I would say, polarizing right now topic between protein and more of a vegetarian vegan diet. And I read a lot of information about how protein um, is imperative as we get older for longevity because of sarcopenia. And you mentioned your research that you've done actually is kind of showing the opposite. So I feel like it's kind of a back and forth. I know like Mark Sisson, he's very paleo. And then there's like the Blue Zones, Dan Butner, I think is his name. The Blue Zones person, they tend to go back and forth between the two. Is there any like medium ground, or do you feel it really would be more beneficial if we moved more plant focused or plant-based?
That's a great question. I think there are two kind of areas to address in your question. So the first one would be in terms of protein needs, right? Just in general, is there, for those who are aging or perhaps above a certain age threshold, is there a certain protein, do their protein needs slightly increase as a result? And first, to that question, or to that part of your question, I want to say that there has been a little bit of recent research over the last decade or two looking into protein. And I think there is a little bit of a shift now towards that. So let me just back up and explain. For major nutrient guidelines for most major governments around the world right now are pretty similar in terms of their protein intake recommendations for their populations. For example, for the United States and Canada, the recommendations is the RDA, which is the recommended dietary allowance of 0.8 grams per kilogram per day. And in the United Kingdom, they follow the reference nutrient intake, which is 0.75 grams per kilogram of a body weight. So pretty similar. And the RDA is really the average daily dietary intake levels that's sufficient to meet the nutrient requirement of nearly all, meaning 97 to 98% of people in a particular life stage and sex group. So, and many people in the United States actually eat more than this RDA in protein. So if it meant to cover 97 to 98% of adults, that's the 0.8 grams of protein per kilogram per day. But now, in recent years, in the last decade or two, there's been more research and more kind of analysis of a review of the recent research. And they're now saying, some expert groups are now saying that the estimated protein intake requirements for those over 65 years of age may be slightly higher, and to at least 1 gram per kilogram per day. And this is by the ESPEN expert group, which is the European Society for Clinical Nutrition Metabolism. And in 2019, there was a paper published jointly by 3 nutrition societies, Germany, Austria, and Switzerland, that recommend about 1 gram per kilogram per day for those over 65. And the reason for that, there's a couple of reasons. One is as you get older and you age, over 65 and above, overall your intake throughout the day may fall, your appetite may fall slightly. Your synthesis, your muscle synthesis and protein synthesis and absorption may decrease slightly, right? So this 1 gram per kilogram per day may help to adjust for all of that. And you mentioned sarcopenia. There is a little bit in there about that too. Although, there's other important aspects to preventing sarcopenia with resistance exercises and things like that are also important. So to answer your question, there is this slightly increased needs, but it may not be as high as many of us think it would be. And there's two aspects to this. I think a lot of longevity researchers, and I'm not sure if you're familiar with Dr. Michael Greger. He's a prominent plant-based physician, but he came out with a book recently called How Not to Age. But there's a lot of research now around the amount of protein you actually need to be able to age well and not accelerate aging. And what they're finding is protein restriction as you get into the upper ends of your lifespan, it's actually more effective in preventing like accelerated aging. So he actually recommends, Dr. Greger, like over 65, no more than 1 gram per kilogram per day. So there's a slight increase, but not maybe as much as many of us think. So that's the first part of your answer to your question. The second part is whether, in general, a plant-based diet can maybe meet those protein, right? Estimated protein needs, either below 65 or over 65. And I think the answer to that would be a definite yes. So even Dan Buettner, if you think about those blue zones with the centenarians, the high percentage of centenarians, they are living on the mostly 95% plant-based diet. 95% of the calories are coming from plant-based sources, the legumes, the whole grains, the fruits, vegetables, nuts, and seeds. And so obviously, they are able to improve their chances of longevity on such of a diet. And even if they need this extra slightly higher estimated protein needs, you can get plenty of protein through plant-based foods without needing to rely on animal-based foods. And I know that is probably a sticking point for many because having been on a meat-heavy diet or been relying on, meats and chicken, beef, eggs, dairy as your main protein sources, right? It can kind of feel very shaky or uncertain to try to remove those from your diet because now you're thinking, now where am I going to get my protein from if I'm just focusing on plants? But I think to answer that, I would say that you don't have to worry about the protein on a plant-based diet because all plant-based foods contain protein, just to varying amounts. And the American Academy of Nutrition and Dietetics, the AND, they have a position statement on vegetarian diets, and they state in there that vegetarian, including vegan diets, typically meet or exceed recommended protein intakes when caloric intakes are adequate. So it's quite important to make sure your overall intake is adequate in the day. And by default, because calories and protein usually come together when you're eating foods, you will likely be meeting all your protein needs and perhaps even exceed it, even on a vegetarian or a vegan diet. Plus, I just want to say there's many, many great protein sources in the plant-based world. Because many people think when they're eating a plant-based diet, it's only fruits and vegetables, but the plant-based world is really diverse. It's filled with so many categories, and many of them are great plant-based protein sources. For example, legumes. I like to start with that because that is an important source. For example, chickpeas and garbanzo beans, kidney beans give you a cooked cup, give you about 15 grams of protein. A cooked cup of soybeans gives you 31 grams of protein. So that's like double the amount in the same, double the amount of protein in the same portion. A cup of cooked lentils gives you 18 grams of protein. And even a block of tofu, if you think of those blocks you get at the supermarket, those can give you 30 to 40 grams of protein just in one block. So that's quite an amount. In whole grains too, because many people think whole grains or grains are just like a source of carbohydrates. And I know there is the fear around carbohydrates with those paleo or keto diets, just that, you have to limit or avoid carbs as much as you can because they'll make you gain weight or be worse than your diabetes. But I think that is a disservice because there's so much benefits to eating whole grains, the right kind of carbohydrates, whole grains, because whole grains are a great source of complex carbohydrates, which are very different from those simple carbohydrates that you might find in very highly refined, ultra processed foods like with a lot of white sugar or white flour, cookies, cakes, those kind of products. In whole grains, you actually have a high proportion of complex carbohydrates, which are much harder and takes longer for your body to digest and to break down. So they actually help keep you fuller and more satisfied for longer after a meal. And they don't raise your blood sugar levels as fast after the meal. So they actually are helpful in promoting a more stable blood sugar profile. And they come coupled, these whole grains, coupled with the fiber, B vitamins, iron, zinc, magnesium, antioxidants, lots of phytochemicals. So lots of benefits. And what many people don't realize is these whole grains also many are a great source of protein as well. For example, like a cup of cooked quinoa gives you more than 8 grams of protein. You have buckwheat. A cup of buckwheat gives you more than 5.5 grams of protein, and a cup of raw oats can give you 10.6 grams of protein just right there. So imagine if you make a cup of like overnight oats, have it sit in the fridge overnight, and next morning, after adding a few things to it, the next morning you can enjoy it, and you're already getting 10 grams of protein right there. Plus, I haven't even talked about nuts and seeds and vegetables and fruits as well. So even avocado can give you 4 grams of protein, and 2 cups of cooked broccoli can give you 7.5 almost of protein. So I hope you see there's many different sources of protein in the plant-based world.
Yeah, thank you for explaining that because I think a lot of us, when we start to think about protein, it immediately moves to, your any type of dairy, eggs, or meat products rather than thinking about what vegetables and, like you mentioned, the seeds, the nuts. Obviously, I think a lot of us think nuts and seeds have protein, but we don't think of the whole grains that have protein. We don't think of the vegetables, like the 4 grams in avocado is really cool. But I'm wondering because one thing I do tell my clients to do is to start off their morning with protein, making sure that they get enough protein in their morning because we want to work on blood sugar stabilization throughout the day and decreasing satiety so they're not hungry. Because I feel like, our standard American diet tends to have us eating a lot of sugary breakfast foods. And my goal is to get them away from that to move more to protein based approach in the morning, whether that be, like you mentioned, vegetables and things like that, which is where I want to go with this question here that I'm getting ready to ask, but making sure that we're getting that first thing. So, one, do you feel that that is a good thing to recommend to my clients? And two, if we're going to take more of a plant-based approach, can you give our listeners some ideas of what they can do to help fulfill those needs, to help them with blood sugar stabilization and satiety?
It's a great question. And to answer that, I would say definitely, I think my recommendation is to help you meet your estimated protein needs in a day is, if you can, to include a good source of protein with each meal. So I think that is a great way, and possibly with a snack too, if you have a snack of choosing a whole food plant-based source, and as I showed you, there's many different sources available that just adding it into the course of your day, by the end of the day, you'll likely be meeting your estimated protein needs without any issues. So breakfast, I think I agree with the concept that I think you should eat your breakfast as like a king, right? Your lunch like a queen and dinner like a prince, right? Many people have it, especially in America, most of us, we topple this and swap it around. So we're eating barely anything for breakfast, maybe having a lunch, and then dinner is our huge meal, right? But it makes sense that morning time is usually when your biorhythms, your insulin levels are usually higher in your body during the morning time, and you're usually up and running and moving around. So you're likely to digest and expend that calories that you're having much more easily than later at night when you're eating and then maybe sitting on the couch watching TV and then going to bed. So I think I definitely agree. Having a good breakfast and will definitely help fuel you, especially if it's a plant-powered one, will fuel you great through the day and help energize you for the day as well. Now, in terms of how to make or add in the protein during breakfast, let's just come up with a few ideas or maybe a few sample meals that can kind of help you think through how this could be possible if you don't add eggs or have meat or sausages with your breakfast meal. So, for example, maybe it's just a very simple breakfast. You're having 2 slices of 100% whole wheat bread, so the good quality, high fiber protein bread. And then you have maybe add on a tablespoon of peanut butter on each one, and maybe add a tablespoon of a pumpkin seeds on each one. And you can obviously add a little bit of nuts if you like to, but you don't have to. And then drink it or enjoy that with a glass of calcium, vitamin D fortified soy milk. That meal itself will already give you 28 grams of protein. So that can be quite a bit because remember, whole grains can contain protein. So the bread that you're buying has some protein in there as well. So that's just one idea. Another idea could be maybe it's a bowl of oats, right? If you're having a bowl of oats, you're cooking maybe half a cup of the raw oats to make 1 cup of cooked oats. And then you're adding in maybe a tablespoon of sunflower seed butter. You could sprinkle nuts on there or even add in some fresh or frozen fruit onto that. You can likely easily, and if you're making it with maybe like a soy milk or a pea-based protein milk into that, you're probably getting at least 15 to 20 grams of protein in that, depending on what you add. You could also add some chia seeds in there or hemp seeds because 3 tablespoons of hemp seeds gives you almost 9 grams of protein. But you don't have to add that much, obviously, but just every little bit will add up into that bowl of oatmeal that you're having in the morning. So does that help, Courtney?
It does. And I do want to point out one thing that you said, because when we hear oatmeal, you mentioned raw oats. And I think that, like, a lot of times we're going for these instant, highly processed foods. But if we take it back just a little bit more to its source, it's going to provide us a little bit more of the fiber that we need than some of these stripped down things. Am I correct in saying that?
Absolutely. Because
Okay.
even the world of whole grains, there is a hierarchy that you can have depending on the level of processing you can have. So definitely if it's oat groats, rolled oats, and then if you can break it all the way down, right? To very quick oats, instant oats, all the way down. Same thing with brown rice. You can have the intact form of brown rice, but you can process it to the point where there's puff rice or rice cakes, right? Where it's been really processed, really and you're losing not just the fiber, but a lot in the bran and the germ, which is the other important layers of the whole grain. You're losing a lot of B vitamins, some protein, right? The fiber and some of the minerals as well. So if you really want the most health benefits from whole grains, you want it to be as intact as possible. Those will give you the most health benefits and also help you in terms of your blood sugars as well. Because remember, the more packaged it is, just like I think of it as a Christmas present or birthday present you're wrapping for your child. If you wrap multiple layers, it's going to take your child much longer to get through to the present. In the same way, than if you just hand it to them, unpackaged or just with one thin layer. In the same way, the more if you more intact the whole grains are, the longer it'll take your body to kind of work through it, to digest it, and to break it down, and for you to be able to absorb it into your body, which is good for you from satiety standpoint and from the glucose standpoint, right? If you want your blood sugar levels to stay more stable over time.
Yes, and that's one thing that my family and I are doing. So I've started making sourdough bread, and I've been playing around with adding spelt and einkorn. And I can't do a lot because my kids will look at me weird if I have too much of that flour. But I do like 50 grams up to about 100 grams where they're still happy with the sourdough I produce for them. But, trying to get more of that whole grain bread.
That's
Yeah,
great.
flour. Yeah. Okay. One more question for you in regard to the protein. There's a lot of talk about like the amino acids with when you eat your protein through meat. Is there any concern, or how can we ensure that we're getting all of the amino acids when we're eating more of a plant-based diet?
It's a good question. There is definitely this idea that plant-based proteins are incomplete, so you need to kind of pair them together in a meal. So that's this idea of complementary proteins. And on the outset, it does make sense because grains and cereals tend to be lower in lysine, which is an amino acid. But then beans and other legumes are high in lysine, but they're low in amino acids like tryptophan, methionine, and cysteine. And nuts and seeds are also good sources of these three amino acids, but as along with grains and cereals. So the idea is that if you create a more complete amino acid profile and get the 9 indispensable amino acids, that you kind of pair these different foods in the same meal to be able to optimize that. But what we know now is that it's actually more important to focus on not just the pairing in a meal. That's not actually important. What's more important is focusing on eating a variety of plant-based foods with protein during the day. And you'll likely be getting those 9 indispensable amino acids in the amounts that you need for your body. And actually, Walter Willett, who's a professor of nutrition epidemiology at Harvard School of Public Health, He states that there's no need to eat complementary foods at the same meal. If you eat a variety of plant-based foods in the diet, your overall mix of amino acids isn't very different from what you get from eating animal protein. And interestingly, his published research that he's published recently showed that a high plant-based protein intake was actually positively associated with longevity, more so than a high animal protein consumption diet. So the more of these plant-based proteins you're eating, the more healthful and more greater your associated chances of longevity compared to eating a high intake of animal-based protein foods, which makes sense if you think back to the blue zones and those centenarians. Plus, going back to the Academy of Nutrition Dietetics in their position statement for vegetarian diets, they state that protein from a variety of plant foods eaten during the course of a day supplies enough of all the indispensable amino acids when caloric requirements are met. So I think the key here is not the pairing, like making sure because that gets tiring as well. You're trying to figure out what foods to pair together in every meal, but it's more making sure you're eating adequate calories in a day to make sure you're meeting your protein needs for the day, and also eating a wide variety of plant-based foods, which I've showed you. Many of them can contain protein and many in good amounts throughout the day, just kind of eating it, adding nuts to your salad, just usually you'll have whole grains, not just by itself, a bowl of whole grains, like a bowl of brown rice by itself. You'll be eating it with either beans or lentils or vegetables, you'll be eating other things together with it anyways. Um, then by the end of the day, you'll probably be likely to meet all your indispensable amino acids requirement for that day. So I think that's good news because plant-based eating is not as restrictive as many people think. They think, oh, compared to many fad diets, they think they have to only, you know, restrict a certain amount of calories or portion sizes. I think plant-based eating is actually very freeing because you have a whole wide variety of plant foods that you can enjoy, and you don't have to worry so much about specific portion sizes. Plus, the last thing I didn't mention was this, that there's actually some complete plant-based protein sources too, and not many people know that, meaning they contain all nine indispensable amino acids in good amounts for your body. So some examples are just like soybeans, hemp, quinoa, buckwheat, amaranth. Um, so these are just some examples. I hope that helps.
Yes, no, it definitely does. And I have one more question. I keep saying one more. Um, with your clients and maybe your family, is there anything you feel that we should be supplementing when we're on a plant-based diet, or do you feel like you're getting everything you need with, and I don't mean, obviously like vitamin D, things like that, that you may have to do based on individuals with their age and where they live and things like that. I don't mean like that, but from the way that you're eating, is there any things that you should supplement?
Yes, I think that actually, and this is might be surprising for many people, that there's really not a whole lot I would particularly supplement if you're on a vegan or a whole food plant-based diet compared to if you're on a regular diet. And actually, the top three that I would say would be vitamin D, which you already mentioned, which I think now with our modern society and being indoors and the climate and fear of skin cancer, sunblock. I think we do need, everyone needs, even if you're on a regular diet, you'll probably need vitamin D supplementation. It's important for immune function and bone calcium absorption too. So I think that's critical. And then you have vitamin B12 is one that I would definitely recommend for those who are definitely on a plant-based exclusive diet, vegan diet, you should supplement with that simply because that it comes vitamin B12 is actually made by bacteria. So, and it's, animals, they tend to store it in their body because they're eating, more um, plant foods, grass, plant foods, and they get the bacteria from the soil and other things. So it gets stored and built up over time. So that's why animal-based foods are a source of that. Um, but you can so nowadays, with our more high level of hygiene and in way foods are processed, and in terms of being washed and processed, the vegetables and fruits and things that we're eating, we're not getting as much as this B12 from food sources as well. So vitamin B12 is, I think, is quite important, but you can get that from a vitamin B12 supplement. But for those, actually, there are certain cases, especially in our general population, those who are on a regular diet, they're finding that quite a number, a significant proportion, especially in the elderly, are actually B12 deficient or they have some kind of deficiency or low levels of B12. And the reason is because it's not just the foods that you're eating, the intake, but when in your stomach, you need this intrinsic factor to help with the absorption of the vitamin B12. And stomach acid levels and absorption rates tend to decrease as you get older as well. So actually recommendations now are if it's over 50 or so, you should definitely consider, even if you're on regular diet, supplementing with B12 because B12 is important for cognitive function as well, and nerve function and many other things. It's very important. And for those who are on bariatric surgery and things like that, who've had things done to their stomach, may will also probably need B12 supplementation. So I think is more people need B12 supplements than we would previously imagine to be. The third thing I would think is the omega-3 fatty acids. I think that is important to be conscious about. You can get the short chain form of omega-3 fatty acids from sources such as chia seeds and ground flax seeds and from walnuts and foods like that. But the conversion rate in your body is a little bit lower on the low end. So I think to cover your bases to make sure that because omega-3s fatty acids are important for brain function as well. It's probably important for to supplement that in your diet as well. And that goes the same for those on a regular diet as well too, because the foods that we're eating may not have so much omega-3 fatty acids, and there's this disproportion nowadays with all the processed foods we're eating. We're having and oils that we're having a higher proportion of omega-6 fatty acids, which are more pro-inflammatory compared to omega-3 fatty acids, more has a more anti-inflammatory effect on our bodies. So I think that would be important to get. Yeah, you can get that from an algae kind of based omega-3 fatty acids source.
Perfect. And then what would you, if you could leave our listeners with one thing, I like to give them something to try within the week to see how they respond to whatever it is that we're discussing. So this week, the plant-based, what would be one thing that you could recommend that our listeners try this week?
I think one great way to maybe an action step that your listeners could take would be to maybe after realizing and seeing just how beneficial to our health natural whole plant-based foods are, is to maybe try just one meal during this week or maybe one meal during the day. Start to look at that meal and think, how can I maybe add a little bit more of a natural whole plant-based foods to that meal? So for example, if it's just a bowl of cereal that you're having that day, maybe seeing if you can add some fresh or frozen fruit to that, or maybe pairing it with maybe a green smoothie. If it's a lunch, if it's a regular burger you're having, maybe having a side salad with that. And maybe or adding in some edamame, which are young soybeans, or sprinkle some walnuts on top. So some way to add in some natural whole plant-based foods to your meal. And I think that's just a small step, but it can be a step in the right direction to moving more away from highly processed foods that we tend to fill our plates with or grab on the go to start adding in some natural, nutrient-rich, whole plant-based foods to your meal.
I love that. I think it's definitely something that is doable and that we can all try. Can you tell our listeners where they can find you?
Absolutely. I'll be delighted to. I think one of the best ways to connect with me would be through my podcast. It's called the Plant-Based Eating Made Easy podcast. You can find it on any platform that you're listening to, audio platform. In that podcast, I just try to provides simple strategies and clear nutrition guidance to help people transform their health. So it's a weekly podcast, so you're welcome to listen to that. I also offer support through private one-to-one coaching where I customize and personalize each person's transition journey to a more plant-powered lifestyle. And I offer an online plant-powered life transformation course. It's a 6-module self-paced online course where students learn how to master the basics of plant-based eating. It comes with foundational skills, practical strategies, those plant-based prep and cooking hacks, and some easy, tasty, whole food plant-based recipes. So it covers the 4 core pillars of my PlantNourished transition success method, which is mindset building, foundation setting, smart recipe integration, and lifestyle success strategies. So if you're interested to find out any of these things or to connect with me further, you can just go to plantnourished.com and you'll get details of the podcast, the course, or the coaching.
Excellent. Thank you so much for taking time out of your day for this conversation. I really enjoyed it.
Thank you, Courtney. It's been a pleasure to speak with you today, and I enjoyed just trying to sharing my passion about plant-based eating and whole plant-based foods with you and your audience today.
I hope you enjoyed this episode and found something to take away to help you practice healthier habits, move more, or handle the midlife and aging with grace. If you enjoyed this episode, please share it with a friend or leave us a review to help us reach more moms just like you. Head to movingthroughmidlife.com to join the free community or learn how you can move more and feel better in your daily life.